45 minutes of speech and Q&A. So.
Thank you. I am extremely pleased to be here to be able to present to everybody, and must say that I don't think I've ever seen so many people with animal PhDs in process or through in one room. It's just amazing, and that in and of itself is a sample of how much this movement has moved forward, that in the world of education, animals are forthright. A small sense of who I am is that I'm now 75 years old, been around a while. I wrote my first law review article on wildlife rights in 1978, and I think I'm the first person in the world, I can't prove it, but I think I'm the first person to ever suggest constitutional changes for animal rights. That was silly, audacious, never going to happen. I don't know. You know, that was 45 years ago, and we're no more closer to it. But that's also, let me suggest as a little advice to you all, you have to be audacious, right? The world doesn't change by being milquetoast. The world changes because you're audacious. Educatedly audacious, smart audacious, but nevertheless, I urge you to step forward and say things. I thought I'd say just a couple of quick things about Gary Francione as his comment, because he and I really have been on opposite sides of any number of things. We're both trying to help animals, obviously, we know that. But I don't think it's always quite clear to people that haven't thought about what he says a lot, about the consequences of what he's saying. First of all, he wants to eliminate the property status. And the consequence of that is no domestic animals. And is that really a world that you want to live in, with no domestic animals? Think about what that means. And I think that that's not my goal. One of the problems of this movement is that people know what they don't want, but there's no real talk about what we do want. What do you want the world to look like in 20 years? What do you want to be the animal-human relationship in 20 years? The other thing that we in this movement don't do a very good job about is understanding about ecology and the role of ecology and what role animals play in that and how we as humans play with that. We are focused upon individual animals, but guess what? The real world is full of group interactions, of survival by groups, and we don't seem to, as a movement, to take into account what that means in the dynamics of what's a good idea and a bad idea about things. He said one thing that I thought was truly repugnant, and that was that this was a zero-sum game, that every effort that is not put towards veganism is lost effort and therefore should be criticized, which would mean my whole life has been a waste. I'm not a promoter of veganism as where I want to spend my time. Obviously, veganism is an appropriate answer for the industrial farm animal problem that we have today. But veganism is not an answer to many of the animal issues, right? It doesn't have anything to do with fur farms, testing, education. There's a number of things that veganism simply is not going to answer. And to ignore all of those problems is to suggest that you're not really focused on animals. And the other problem with his suggestion about veganism is it's not going to happen. The world has not become vegan. And, that's one of these sad things about getting older, is that you get a little more cynical about things and you understand a little bit about the complexities of the world and what power is. What power is. Okay, now he's thinking that we can change the world if we simply make everybody a vegan. Well, if everybody became a vegan, yes, it would change the world. But that's not going to happen. And I think the last 4 or 5 years in the United States has proven, because you all are highly educated, your PhD thesis is governed on the issue of logic, correctness of facts, all of this good thinking, right? Guess what? That doesn't drive most people. We have seen in the last 5 years, COVID really brought it out in the United States, the fact that the United States elected President Trump is a reputation. It just, logic obviously is not working. Information does not change everybody's mind. We can't even decide whether or not, well, obviously I've decided that whether or not Trump won an election. I mean, there are millions of people in the United States who literally still think that the election was stolen from Trump. And factually, that is simply not true, and there's no facts to support it whatsoever. Nevertheless, they really believe it. So, how people in our new interconnected world of the internet and all the echo chambers that exist, all sorts of weird things exist out there that people live in. I want to show you something from global warming. I teach international environmental law, and it's the most depressing course I have to teach because there's so many things going wrong. This is a screenshot of a chart of the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere as taken from a observation post on the Hawaiian island of Maui. I've been able to go there and see this observatory. It's up on the top of a volcanic peak. And so it's basically sampling the Pacific air as it comes from the Asian continent, and it's been all mixed over time. And you can see, obviously, how CO2 is increasing. And I don't have a pointer. I might point out that in 1992, an international treaty was signed to reduce CO2 so we wouldn't have global warming. And then 10 years later, there was the Kyoto Protocol to further reduce global warming. And then 10 years after that, there was another conference, and then the Paris conference in 2018. And today, they just finished up this a 2-week conference as a prep conference for the actual next summit that's going to be in Egypt in November. And thousands of words, a mountain of words and promises and all that stuff. And guess what? Not a damn thing's happened. It's gotten worse and worse. And I pretty well at this point have given up. We are not going to keep global warming at 2%. Those of you in Finland, I think you've got a real problem because the Arctic is warming at twice the rate of any place else. And so you will soon have a tremendous ecological change in that area. And so I bring this up because it's an example, a sad example, of how information is insufficient to produce outcome. Okay, we got the best information, there's reports up to here. Scientists swear, thousands of scientists all agree that this is the nature of the problem. And every time they find something new, it's on the negative side. Oh, it's happening quicker. Oh, this is a problem. Oh, we didn't know about this. And we're reaching a point where that it's it's not going to be 2%. Hopefully they'll keep it down, but a 3% increase is quite likely on a global basis. Now, the limitations of logic and information, and that means something for us in the area of animal law, because for farm animal issues, for industrial farm animal issues, we have the same problem that global warming does. Instead of energy companies, we have food companies and seed companies. Global corporations of billions of dollars, think about that, with which to keep at bay people that want change. It's just like the coal companies and the oil companies keeping at bay change on global warming because they need to have their profit. And it's a failure of the capitalist system. And not that I have any other system to suggest, I don't, but we must understand that capitalism is not going to solve global warming. It's not going to get rid of industrial farm animals. Okay, that only comes through human beings changing, modifying what is happening. Another piece that makes me a little bit unique is I live on a farm. It's a beautiful farm. It's a fantastic farm, 100-acre farm. Pasture, woods. I put in a pond, so I got fish and turtles and ducks. And we have farm animals. I think I know what a chicken is. I've had chickens now for 20 years, and they're amazing little creatures. Okay, they really are cool. I've had Icelandic sheep. My wife raised them commercially. At one point, we had a herd of 80 Icelandic sheep. Also, amazing animals and interesting animals and animals worth having around, I think. So I have a different perspective. We have about 9 new chickens that were hatched out just two weeks ago. They're now trying to follow mom around to learn about the world. And my chickens are totally free. They can leave anytime they want. The chickens only go about 100 yards from where they're born. They really have a very modest footprint, and you can trust them. The thing about both of these animals, the Icelandic chickens, the Icelandic sheep, is they are still intelligent in the way that their genes were developed over time. They can take care of themselves, and they're smart. And the sheep here is what's called the leader sheep, and that's the smartest of the smart. It's actually a genetic line of part of the sheep, and they're the ones who take care of the herds. In Iceland, the sheep are let go. They take care of themselves for the whole summer in the flatlands and grasslands. They don't need humans, but that means somebody has to be smart among the sheep. We've, of course, among the commercial sheep breeder, they've killed off all the smart ones, right? Most people don't want smart sheep because they cause problems. So we have that. We just added 30 new guineas to our farm about a month ago. So I have a slightly different perspective. I like animals. One thing to keep in mind is that if you like wildlife, you need to transform all farming to pasture-based, because I have the sheep, and I have some cows now too on the land, we have snakes, and we have birds, and we have turtles, and we have all sorts of things because we have pasture as the basis of the food system for that, which also sequesters CO2. Animallaw.info, for anybody's interested, it has the most comprehensive web-based, legal web base for U.S. law. We have it all. We have everything. I'm trying to develop more international materials, so we have a good collection of UK law, and I'm getting some Indian law in there as well, and I'm looking to expand that as we go through time. This is my most recent book, came out just 2 years ago, The Future of Animal Law. And much of what I talk about today will be coming out of that book or is covered in more detail in that book, just in case you're interested. The title, Legal Theory for Animal Rights, I've pondered about what does that phrase mean? And I think there's I'm not sure it means anything, is the problem. I didn't find a good focus. Is there a legal theory for animal rights? Not an ethical theory, right? We got lots of that. Do we have a legal theory? And that sort of depends on how you think about the legal system itself. And I think that we'll see that it's not subject, there is no obvious goal for the legal system. The legal system is a tool, right? And it's a tool used to organize a society. And the question is, how does that society want to organize itself? And the phrase human rights in the EU has a very rich context, right? You have a human rights court. You have a lot more development. And I think you should realize that you're in a bubble for that purpose. There is no such thing in the United States or any of the other Commonwealth countries that I'm aware of, let alone the other countries in the world. So if we don't have a legal context for human rights, then it's almost impossible to talk about a legal context for animal rights. The other thing I did want to mention is that authoritarian governments, as a big government, are the anathema for animal law. Authoritarian governments don't care about animals. Look at any government around the country and where is progress being made or not being made. It's long been my theory that animal progress in the legal system only occurs in robust democracies. If you don't have a democracy, that's because people demand change for animals. And if the people are incapable of making that demand on their government, then it's not going to happen from above. Right? Why does China not have a national animal law? Because they don't care. It's not a priority. An authoritarian government simply has one priority: to keep power. That's the primary rule. How do I keep the power I now have? How do I get rich off that power? Et cetera, et cetera. They don't care about people. They don't care about the environment. They don't care about animals. China, Brazil, authoritarian government. India, moving towards an authoritarian government. U.S. just went through somebody who would like to have been authoritarian government, but we were able to eliminate him, and now we just hope he doesn't come back. But I've given up saying what the American people are going to vote for or not vote for. I assured so many people outside the U.S. that, oh, don't worry, we'll never elect Trump, and he got elected. So sort of keep that in the back of your mind. We as a movement are only going to flourish where there is a functional democracy. Here's a chart I made to suggest how one visual way to think about, well, where are we for progress for animals? And this is sort of cut off. At the bottom, they are nothing but things, and you can abuse it. If it's a thing, you really can't abuse it. You use it to however you want. But then we have, some became property. There was a time when only commercial animals were property. Other animals like dogs and cats were not even property, okay? And then some welfare protection, anti-cruelty laws, intentional abuse, disrespectful use, respectful use. My ethical book is called Respecting Animals. That's also available on Amazon. And my main idea that we'll get to later is moving to limited living property. Can we have personhood, guardianship? We have all these terms floating around on top. So we're climbing a mountain with the animals. This is Roscoe Pound, and I found him very early in the law library. He was the dean at Harvard, and he wrote a 4-volume set on jurisprudence. And in that, he addressed the issue of, well, why do we have a legal system? What is it doing? And his view was very pragmatic, and one that I fully accept, and that is that we have a legal system to resolve disputes of conflicting interest between individual humans and interest between the state and the individual. And that's what it's all about, is resolving conflicts. Now, it's resolved by those who hold the political power to make the laws, obviously, okay? So we have the evolution of women's rights in the United States. The white males ultimately agreed to give up their superior status and agree that women should be able to vote too. But it took 50 years to begin to go through that entire process. And so what we want to do is to inject animal interest into the debate and say, yes, we understand we're resolving all these human interests, but we have these animals too. And they have interest, right? Everybody in this room understands animals have interest. They have interest because they are DNA-created creatures. We all are driven by what our DNA has created and then our life experiences on top of that. So my dog has particular interest. Some are just unique to him as an individual, but mostly it's because he's a dog. And his dog DNA drives certain things, and my cats are not the same DNA. They're different, both as a species and then also as individuals. I have Great Pyrenees as my dogs, and because they're from the Pyrenees Mountain, and they were bred to guard sheep. And when we got the sheep, we thought we'd get, except they never actually were the sheep. They protected the house and us more, and the farm, and they still do. That's the picture some of you saw yesterday, the selfie taken. We'll get to that later. Okay, the next thing you got to do is, legal rights. And again, not ethical perspective. What might we want from the law on behalf of animals? And these are some of them, and some are pretty obvious: not to be held to put prohibited uses, not to be harmed, to be cared for, to have living space. I reject entirely the idea that our goal should be that we give them bodily liberty. That people throw that around all the time. What does that mean? That you can't have bodily liberty and have domestic animals? That you can't? That makes no sense to me whatsoever. That doesn't mean that it's not important that they have an appropriate space to live in. And that's the other thing that I've learned, is that you can watch an animal and its species, and you can know what does it need. I can't allow my Great Pyrenees to roam as they might will, because they would literally go miles, okay? And that's dangerous for them, and it's dangerous for other people. But I know that they can live their life very well on a number of acres that I have, that they are able to roam and run in and chase the UPS truck, which is obviously a DNA-driven thing for dogs, is to chase delivery trucks, and they might do very well at that. to be possessed by those with capability and willingness to provide the necessary care, to own or control property themselves. And that, I think, is a new idea that I'd like you all to think about as a goal for what you want to accomplish in the law, is that allow that animals could actually become owners of money. Obviously not in the full sense that we do, but as beneficiaries of trust. I think that is, that now can happen in the U.S. I'll show you later. How do we know if we've given them a legal right? And this also, I think, needs a lot of sharp thinking, not from an ethics point of view, but from as lawyers. What is a right? And that's actually a very hard question, and it's one that law students, you ask them that after a year or so, and they sort of look at you blank. They've learned all this law, but what is a right? And this is a conversation that Steve Wise and I started back in the 90s among ourselves about how do we do this, right? And I think that this sort of sets us up. Is the existence of an interest of an animal acknowledged by the legal world? Okay. Are these interests given some weight in a legal decision? Does the outcome of the decision run to the benefit of the animal? All right. How do we get to those rights? And there's thresholds that you can build upon to do this by looking at it. First, acknowledge whether or not animals have the legal capacity to receive rights. And that's what Steve Wise is doing with his cases with the Non-Human Rights Project, is he's using the habeas corpus cases to simply he wants a court to say, yes, an animal, a chimpanzee, an elephant, can be a person, the word person. That's his victory, is can I get a court to say that? Then be the holder of a right. Once you're in the room as a legal person, then you have to have at least one right to be meaningful. Then have somebody to be able to assert the interest, i.e. us humans, us lawyers. That's not so hard. We've got lots of mechanisms already in place where one party can represent those who are incapable of representing themselves. To have relief of the law flow directly to the animal, allow the animal to be the plaintiff in lawsuits. A lot of people seem to think that rights are only going to be accomplished if they're the plaintiffs in lawsuits. No, that's the last step in the rights process, not the first step. Okay? I think, and we can dispute that, that you can have legal rights when you're not the plaintiff in a lawsuit. The most recent most recent statutory things about divorces in the United States is where the judge has the capacity to decide who gets the animal based upon the best interest of the animal. Clearly, the animal interest is then before the judge. They must look at that animal and say, I see you, I want to learn about you, I have to decide whether or not you're going to go to this person or this person. What is best for you? Not who owns you. Okay? Can property also be... Can you be property and hold rights? And this is one of the things that I've tried to say for a long time that the abolitionists simply just don't want to deal with, because I've taught property for 43 years. I can't tell you how many books I've read, how many things I've read. We can do what we want with property concepts, okay? It's all made up by us. We have real property, we have personal property, we have intellectual property. We just need another category, living property, okay? We know that animals are different from pianos and computers, and the law knows it too at this point in time. Doesn't do a very good job about it, obviously, but we already, from 1867, the New York law was first passed, we've known that animals were different from other property. So it's a long time. It's been there, but not been built upon or built up. However, welfareism protection is not enough, is not ideal. I agree to that point, and therefore that's why we need to give them rights, because if they have interest protected, but it's only if it's asserted by the government. Okay, so the anti-cruelty laws are government-based assertions to protect the interest of some animals in some circumstances. But the government doesn't always do a good job of that. So I'd rather have it where private organizations or attorneys could also enforce the cruelty laws on behalf of the animals. We do have a psychological problem in the sense that there are any number of people in the literature who say, Well, but they're not human beings, and we have to separate. We must always have that separation between animals and human beings because we are so special, we can't acknowledge these other things out there. And God made us this way, and God said these are other things. Well, I respectfully disagree, and I don't think it hurts us as a society to acknowledge the interest of animals. And the other thing is we can change property law. We can take away rights and still have it property. And we've started to do that in the United States for animals, particularly because of puppy mills and the problems of how do you control that. And so in several states it now is illegal to sell a puppy in a pet store. You can't do it anymore. You own that dog, but you can't sell it. We've taken away that property right, that aspect of property. Okay, well, we can modify other things. And indeed, what I really would like to see is make it illegal to buy puppies over the internet. That would also be an extremely positive step forward because all sorts of fraud and bad things happen over the internet. I think that my concept of living property is to first psychologically have it acknowledge that animals are different from other property. And then if we want to move that further during your lifetime into a guardianship or a more protective sounding thing, that's fine. I've used the word living property not to impress you all, but to impress judges and other people who understand that they're property and are maybe willing to give up some of that idea, but they're not willing to declare freedom for the animals. Okay, so I look at MySpace. Steve Wise now says it's okay if Favre says that they're going to go to living property as a temporary holding place before we move on to the next phase, and that's fine. I'll be dead, and you all don't have to worry about insulting me, so you then can move it to the next phase. But let's get them out of just property and talk about living property. And we're pretty close to a guardianship model in a number of the states and countries around the world. But this is the criminal law in our state. Adequate care means provision of food, water, shelter, sanitary conditions, exercise. I can't get my cat to exercise, I'm sorry. Veterinary medical attention in order to maintain a good state of health. Good state of health is defined as body weight, temperature, age, species specific. The only thing that's not there is mental well-being, and that could be done fairly straightforward. So the criminal law is already set up that these animals are different, that animals are different from other property. You have duties to these animals. Well, that's what a guardian is. Now, how do rights arise? Well, there's two big divisions: the Big Bang Theory and the accretion theory, is like I was saying. And a lot of people in the movement presume it's going to be a big bang. All of a sudden, boom, all animals have all sorts of rights. That's part of what Steve Wise is trying to accomplish, because if he can get a court to say that a chimpanzee is a person, he's just breached a door, a big door, right? And from that point, then, oh my goodness, the lawsuits are going to flow, right? Which animal? Now the court would have to decide what animal deserves this personhood, and that's one of the reasons I'm pretty sure the judges said no in New York, was they're not willing to open that door. But the Big Bang is a logic-driven, science-based, and that's all with that habeas corpus. He had stacks of information, science from all the scientists in the world, philosophers, religious people, all saying that chimpanzees or elephants are deserving of this particular consideration. And his point is that the courts are supposed to be the place where logic and information drive outcomes, right? So they're presenting all the information you can need to say that a chimpanzee or an elephant should be a person. They're so much like humans. Also, don't criticize Steve for having that philosophy. That's a legal strategy. That's not his personal philosophy. He's a full animal rights person, believe me, and he doesn't think that you have to be like a human to have rights. But he thinks that's the best argument to take to a judge who doesn't have an animal rights perspective. And I agree that if you're going to go to a logic-driven place, then this is probably the way to go. However, I've also seen that there's another path, and that's the dog path. And the dog path is not driven by logic. It's driven by affection. It's driven by companionship. It's driven by other things. And that is going to go through the legislature. It is going through the legislature. I'm going to show you a number of examples in the United States. Because, believe it or not, the political process is not information logic driven. Right? That's not how you get law. And that's it's a sad thing about when you're young and if I just explain it to you, you're going to change your ideas. Well, sometimes, maybe, but you don't understand politics. You don't understand money, power, competing forces at the same time, political party pressure on you. Will I get elected? Can I face the public? What's my opponent going to say if I help these animals? I mean, there's just this whole different world in the world of politics. And I urge all of you to interface with a politician. Take a project to a politician and explain what you'd like and see what they say. I mean, there are politicians that are very comfortable with animal stuff, but most do it because two of the politicians I worked with, I ultimately asked them, well, why are you willing to do this? They said, my daughter has moved me to this position. Not their own thinking, but that they were preached to by their family, which is sort of cool in and of itself. And the place for compassion as a motivator for going to the politician is the animal in the family. Okay? Chimpanzees' capacities compared to ours, emotional intellect, information, dogs share our hearts. My dog is like my child, and you should respect that. And if you don't respect that, I'm going to go do something about it. What motivates somebody to go to a politician and say, we need to change the law? And I think a word that is useful here is not truth, but fair. It's not fair that dog's X. It's not fair. The word fair is a powerful word. It has a legal context, but it also has a cultural context. Oh. This is Grumpy, my cat. He's occasionally mad at me for something. Cat people obviously are included in this, but my life experience is that cat people are a little more passive and not so assertive. Dog people can get in your face and talk about things, but don't forget the cats. What are the paths that you can do? Structurally, international treaties at the top, national constitutional law, statutory law, and court decisions. That's how law is made. International treaties is law between states. It's not law that drives individuals, but it is, I think, important. I wrote that, as Mike mentioned, I drafted the first Convention for Animal Welfare back in 86, 87. And again, just totally audacious, but, put it out there, absolutely nothing happened. We had hoped India might take it up, but they didn't, and then I didn't have the resources to do anything about it. But now we're in a new place. 3 of us here in this room are helping write a revision of the treaty. COVID has given us perhaps a door because there's more awareness of wildlife. Human interfaces needed to be talked about for our own protection. And this is, I heard some criticism about people that were arguing for change based upon the fact it was good for the human as opposed to good for the dog. Hey, join the real world, okay? You find the argument that moves the people forward. So if COVID is going to help move things forward so I can get through a general welfare treaty, I'm all for it. I'll argue, well, whatever it takes to get your attention to move it forward. Barriers to change. Wow. Custom, tradition, ignorance, lack of political... Animals seem to be number 15 on most lists. The trouble is most legislators only do the top 5. It's always there, but it never quite rises up. What is it going to take to make it rise up? Religious views. That's hard to talk about, but it's a reality. That's the website that you can get the information about the new treaty that's being written. We're in the process of finalizing the second draft. We hopefully within the next month will have the second, a much more clean and robust set of materials that we're going to go forward and provide to everybody that'd like to see it. This was mentioned before, and this is the European Treaty 2009 on functioning of the EU. And to show you some of the issues that, from a legal point of view, of how do you state things. Since animals are sentient beings, there's a duty to pay full regard to the welfare requirement of animals while respecting administrative provisions and customs relating to religious rituals, cultural traditions. In other words, they're telling you what has to be balanced, but they don't tell you how to balance it. And so that's interesting, but not definitive. Swiss Constitution, I think we all know about that, taking out the dignity of living beings. The word dignity is not a legal word. It's a philosophical word. And I see the word dignity, and I say, well, that's nice, yes, my mother has dignity. What does that mean? It doesn't mean anything until the legislature reduces what does that mean to practicalities. Does it mean provide food and water? Does it mean provide mental stimulation and exercise? What does it mean to have dignity? That word is so soft, it doesn't mean anything by itself. Animals are not objects. We've seen that in a couple of states and countries now where they say they're trying to say they're not property, but they never say what they are. And that's where, hey, they're living property. We can find a positive place to put them. But the thing is about living property is not all animals are going to be considered living property at the same time, unless somebody writes something really bizarre. It's incremental. It's slow. It's a building process. Indian Constitution requires all of its citizens to have compassion for living creatures. Fantastic. How do you do that? How do you force compassion? Compassion's inside the human head, just like dignity. It's not something you can enforce as a state forward. I'm going to skip that. Steve Wise's efforts. If you haven't seen Unlocking the Cage, I urge you to see that. That's an amazing expose in which I have 5 seconds. That's my fame of glory, is my 5 seconds. I was with him for 2 days in Florida shooting this. They had at least 6 hours of tape, and they use the 5 seconds where I'm pointing a figure at Steve. Habeas corpus cases are popping up like big mushrooms. Fantastic. It is, I think. Understand, under U.S. law, Steve Weiss went to New York because in the common law system, it is appropriate for judges to change the common law of their own will without a legislature. Okay? We have that power. That doesn't seem to exist in civil law systems, so it's harder to do in a civil law system than a common law system. And it's done at the state level, not at the federal level. That was PETA's mistake with the Nauru because they tried to change something at the federal level, and that's not, the judges don't have that same power, which I know that sounds strange, right? State court judges have more power than federal, but they do. The U.S. is strange. So I think Steve, it took him 5 years to figure out where to bring it and what to bring. So talk about legislative and legal strategy. He was the ultimate compiler of legal strategy. That the animal took its own pictures really is sort of cool, right? He seemed to understand what the camera was. Go on the internet and you can get all about it. So I unfortunately am stuck with, rather than blowing up the wall, which Steve wants to do, I'm building bridges, small bridges across the stream. But each bridge, you rebuild it, you add to it, you make it stronger and stronger over time. So the family is my focal point for pushing animal rights. Because in my mind, if we can get one group of animals to be recognized as legal beings, then it's much easier to move to other groups of animals and to expand that out. Okay, so what's the bridgehead to animal rights? And that's why I think dogs and cats are the bridgehead, because it is possible, we've seen it in the U.S., to get, it snows where I live. And what will they, and that has to do with a state law. We have trust law. In the United States and common law countries, we have a very robust trust law area. It's always been impossible to create a trust for animals because they weren't human beings. And all of a sudden, I was around when the ALDF supported the national law to move it to allow it for animals. So an animal alive during the settler's life. So you can put $100,000 in a trust, if you have $100,000, for your dogs or your cats. And it's absolutely enforceable. In my mind, that makes the dog or cat the beneficiary of the trust. which means you're a legal person, and it's enforceable. And all these statutes say a designated that it can be enforced by any person who has an interest in making it happen. So it's an enforceable right that they have the use and access to that money. If a trustee blows it on a BMW, they could be called into court and be held for that, unless they could prove the dog needed a BMW. Victim representation is another area. You need to take the law, go down to the small parts of the law, and pick a piece of the law and see that might relate to animals. We now have one state that says that a victim, that in a criminal proceeding, the animal can have a presence by appointment of a law student or lawyer. Another one that's really set aside that I'm working on right now in Michigan is criminal sentencing. Because if you look at most guidelines for criminal sentencing, divide the world into humans and property. And so if this bad guy here destroys a car, he has the possibility of X sentence. If he destroys me, he's got real problems, right? He's going to be in jail forever. What if he does it to a dog? And right now, almost all criminal sentencing provisions treat the dog as property. And I think it's not fair. I think that it's emotionally, you can move that needle over to an intermediate point. That's half cat. This is spoken of by another person at the conference yesterday, and that is that Louisiana, which is not a cutting-edge animal state, passed a law relatively recently in which it put children and animals in the same paragraph and said that you can break into a car to retrieve either one. This is where I think it's the most breathtaking, and that is the divorce law in the United States right now for the ownership and joint ownership of animals, taking into consideration the well-being of animals. Now, what was a little bizarre about this is it comes from Alaska. You don't think of Alaska as a breaking point entry, but one day I got a call from somebody who said, I'm from Senator so-and-so's office in Alaska, and we want to do something about animals and divorce. Wow. That was just a senator of his own volition said, that's not fair. And once Alaska did it, once one state does it, then all of a sudden other states are open up to it. It's just amazing. If you can just get that one state to do it. So now we have, I think, 5 states. And I think in the next 10 years, we'll get at least another 20 states to take up the same thing. How to create strong rights. Allow people other than the government to enforce things. Appoint employees of humane societies as animal police with civil sanctions capable of being done. Allow private organizations to bring lawsuits to prevent civil enforcement of criminal law statutes. We have one state that does that now. Allow attorneys and law students to join court proceedings to ensure the interests of animals is spoken within the court. And then finally, the one that's the most difficult to get is allow the animal itself to bring lawsuits. But there's so much that we can do for animals without having to deal with the issue of whether or not they're a plaintiff. So what can you all do? You can draft new legal language, particularly if you're a lawyer. Lobby for new laws. You don't have to be a lawyer to do that, but you need a lawyer with you. Get elected. Please, somebody out there, get elected, right? Work with organizations, legal organizations, and you've got a nice one here, right here in Finland, and I think they're very active, and I'm extremely interested to see how you proceed with the proposed constitutional amendments. And a lot of these good things are going to happen in small countries. The U.S. is so big and complex and this stuff, and so a small group of people can make something happen in a country in Finland that's not going to happen in the U.S. And that's why South America is being very interesting right now. And most of them are the small countries. Things are popping there. And it's because there's fewer people. It just takes a couple of people to make something happen. So what are you going to do? Become a professor. Hey, I wish all of you could have the life I've had as a professor. It really is an ideal life. It is so hard to get, though. I couldn't get my own job now. No. Write books. We're all good at that, too. Welfare versus rights. We can get better welfare for living animals now without holding our breath and saying we're going to get you rights sometime. And so I hope you will be able to do both, pursue better welfare for animals while trying to accrete better rights for animals at the same time. Thank you.